Here we go again. I was just in the middle of finishing up the details for my Harbinger video, and now Hoyoverse had to go and release this little nugget of a teaser, the prelude to wisdom. Seriously, we were already caught off guard by a Winter Night's Lotso, and Hoyoverse is just keeping the surprises coming. Well, you know what they say, fight fire with fire, leeks with leeks. The early bird gets the worm, you must become that which you hate. Hoyoverse has embraced the darkness, decided to say f it, and dropped a lot of interesting lore. So why don't we analyze some stuff? Yeah, I know you're waiting for the Harbinger video, but I gotta release this one first because this does have something to do with what I talk about in the Harbinger video. I just want to focus on the Aksha system and the original and current Dendro Archons. I won't be going too deep. This is just my surface level predictions for now. Anyway, let's talk about the Aksha system. Yae Miko mentioned that knowledge is managed holistically as a resource in Sumeru. The Akasha system is how the nation accomplishes this. While we weren't given any details about the system beyond its primary function, we can always look a little deeper to find the answers we need. I think the Akasha system will be exactly like the Akashic records. The Akashic records are basically a compilation of anything and everything that's ever happened or will happen to all life forms, including those life forms' thoughts, actions, and emotions. This compilation exists in a place called the mental plane, and those who can access the records will see all of its secrets. It's like a cloud system of knowledge that can be accessed by those who are able to perceive it. You know what, the Akashic records sound a hell of a lot like? No. The ley lines. Like, they're straight up the same thing as the ley lines, which record anything and everything that's ever happened or lived in Teyvat. They literally possess the flow of time. So perhaps the Akasha system of Sumeru functions in the same way as ley lines. Maybe it even accesses them somehow. This is extremely similar to the concepts I talked about in this video, in which I theorized Teyvat is actually a domain of consciousness in which memories, dreams, and wishes can become real because Teyvat is someone's mind, at least partially. Like, dreams are becoming super important. I hope you guys are really paying attention. You can check that video out for more context, but domains of this nature likely have a master who controls and fulfills the wishes of the individuals inside the domains. However, it seems only certain individuals can use their power of imagination to actually shape the world. It's like the divine ingenuity domain, where only people who touched a certain switch could actually affect the domain itself. I have a feeling that the Akasha system in Sumeru is going to work exactly like this. It's likely only certain individuals can access the Akasha system with these weird little earpieces. Think of that as the switch for the system, and the information available to these individuals is also limited depending on status. The higher ranked you are, the wider range of forbidden knowledge you have available to you. And now that I think about it, I wonder if this system can provide powers over prophecy. At the end of a Winter Night's Lotso, Kale wakes up after having a vision of Dotori burning down this massive tree. I'll discuss more about this in my upcoming Harbinger video, but I wonder if the Akasha system is what allowed Kale to see this vision. Though she isn't wearing one of those weird earpieces, powers of prophecy and time usually have something to do with the ley lines, so it's possible the Akasha system, which is pretty much like the ley lines, has something to do with Kale's vision. On that note, I really wonder what the sages of Sumeru actually know about the world of Teyvat, especially since this entire system functions via the original Dendro Archon's Gnosis. We'll talk about her in a second, but we already know Morax was able to create Mora using his Gnosis, so to hear that a Gnosis can be used to resource something like knowledge is very interesting. But the Akasha system is hella dangerous and is easily abusable for several reasons. With knowledge managed as a resource that only certain parties have access to, this can easily lead to a caste-like system where those in the upper echelons of the academia can hoard information for themselves and keep the public none the wiser. You can censor things. You might even be able to manipulate the public, and I think the academia has taken advantage of that feature. I'm sure that most people can't dream in Sumeru because of the Akasha system. The people of Sumeru take pride in the fact that they don't dream and see it as a testament to their wisdom, but that's all smoke and mirrors. See, the Akashic records that I talked about earlier don't just record things like time or thoughts and emotions, but also dreams and desires, and therein lies the problem. Accessing the records doesn't mean you'll be just looking at recorded history, but you'll be able to see things that didn't actually happen. So how do you separate fact from fiction? Well, you make sure no one's imagination can screw with the system. You get rid of the dreams. This is all for the sake of the system running and operating smoothly. It's also possible the lack of dreams is just a side effect of the Akasha system and not something that was intentionally implemented, and that's terrifying because I just keep thinking about Dainsleif's word during the Travail trailer.
In the perpetual meantime of a sheltered eternity, most are content to live and not to dream. But in the hidden corners where the god's gaze does not fall, there are those who dream of dreaming.
Not being able to dream is scary, and since dreams in the world of Teyvat might be equivalent to power, since Teyvat might be a domain of consciousness where dreams can become real, the lack of the ability to dream seems to be yet another way the gods can oppress humanity. I just wonder who's behind this system and why they installed it in the first place. Miko said she didn't know who started it, whether it was the sages or Lesser Lord Kusanali, and honestly it could go either way. Perhaps the sages took advantage of the god of the wood's death and used her gnosis to create this system for themselves. Or maybe Kusanali set up the system to guide how knowledge is distributed in Sumeru. She is an Archon after all, and part of her job is to keep humanity ignorant of the truth. But whatever. I want to switch gears and talk about Greater Lord Rukkhadevata and Lesser Lord Kusanali. Greater Lord Rukkhadevata was the original Archon who died during the Cataclysm 500 years ago. It's said that her death made the grass and trees never speak again. That's all we know about her so far, but we do have a few trails of breadcrumbs to follow, and the first is actually in her name. Rukkhadevata is a name for a tree spirit or dryad, and they receive offerings at the feet of the trees they live in exchange for fulfilling one's desire. The trees in which Rukkhadevata dwell are oftentimes Bodhi trees. Bodhi trees are sacred fig trees in Buddhism. They're called trees of awakening because the original Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, became enlightened while meditating under the one enshrined at the Mahabodhi temple. This temple was erected in commemoration of the Buddha's enlightenment on these grounds. The interesting thing about this Bodhi tree, however, is that it's been destroyed several times throughout history, only for it to regrow or be replanted. So what we're working with is a tree that houses a god or spirit that can grant the wishes of those who provide offerings for it, and despite being destroyed, it always finds a way to survive or regrow. This has a lot of implications for Sumeru. If Genshin's Rukkhadevata is anything like her real-life counterpart, then this big tree that Dottore is burning definitely has something to do with her. Dottore does say that one of his segments is conducting an experiment in blasphemy being an act of offense against sacred things or gods, so maybe this tree has something to do with the original Dendro Archon. Maybe this tree is a ley line tree that is directly linked to the Akasha system, and burning it down will throw everything into disarray in Sumeru. Perhaps this tree grew when the Greater Lord died, similar to how the oak tree at Windrise grew after Vanessa's ascension to Celestia. Or maybe it's more like the sacred Sakura tree. I have a feeling it might be. If you've watched my Sun and Moon series, particularly part 1.5, I talked about the parable of the tree from the book Before Sun and Moon. To summarize the parable, the primordial one wanted to cut down one of his trees in his garden to repair his pavilion. His gardener was in love with the spirit of the tree that was going to be cut down, so he asked Istaroth, the god of time, for help. She told him to take some branches from the tree and plant it in his backyard, after which she planted the tree in the past so that it could grow in the future. What's interesting is they showed us this exact power of Istaroth's with the planting of the sacred Sakura tree. What happened with the sacred Sakura is literally what happened towards the end of the parable, word for word, and I think we're about to see something similar happen again. But this time, we will directly see a god that has been reborn from the remains of her previous form. I think Lesser Lord Kusanali is the remnant of the original Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, the new tree spirit that is a continuation of the past one. I mean, it's super overt given that Rukkhadevata is a name for tree spirits, and the one in the Mahabodhi temple was destroyed and regrown several times. It's like what I said in this video concerning the goddess Demeter and her cult. Her worshippers believed that life could sprout from dead bodies, just like you can grow a new tree from its own branches. I think we're about to see this with Rukkhadevata and Kusanali. Maybe the Dendro Archons have something to do with the Moon Sisters, including Istaroth, who I have theorized to be guardians of the ancient Irminsul tree in the Abyss, or might all be the tree in some way. I swear I can't look at anything in this game without seeing the sun or moon, but it's fitting that a lot of these concepts I've talked about in relation to the Moon Sisters would apply to the Dendro Archon, who leads the nation of wisdom and life, which has a gigantic tree and its own system that appears to function a lot like the ley lines. Speaking of the Dendro Archon, by the way, if I had to guess, this mysterious little girl Nahida is probably Kusanali. She's got little green highlights at the tips of her ponytail, which is a feature all of the Archons possess. She has no visible vision on her, at least from what we can see. Sumeru's statues of the Seven depict what look like a child, and Nahida is a child. And I think it's super interesting that she is being depicted as a child. It makes total sense, especially if she is actually just a reincarnation of the greater lord Rukkhadevata. I mean, we already know that gods can become childlike and even lose their memories once their power is spent, so I wonder if something similar happened to Kusanali. I'll be interested to see how this plays out in Sumeru's storyline, especially because if you've seen part 1.5 of my Sun and Moon series, then you know that I think the tree spirit mentioned in the Parable of the Tree is actually the first Seelie, and the new tree spirit is actually Paimon. Just check out that video for context. In fact, just watch all of my Sun and Moon series.
No.
Now, I am gonna stop you if you think the Parable is just directly talking about Rukkhadevata and Kusanali, just like some people thought the Parable was directly referring to the sacred Sakura tree. I want to remind you that the story of the sacred Sakura had nothing to do with the premise of the Parable, and while Rukkhadevata and Kusanali might have something to do with the Moon Sisters, I doubt the Parable talks about them specifically. The story of the Parable is ultimately a story about love between the gardener and the tree spirit, as well as one other interesting detail that we'll discuss in future videos. Not to mention, Before Sun and Moon was written by an Enkonomian scribe. The details of the book mention things that happened in the distant past, like pre-Archon's past, and definitely pre-Cataclysm 500 years ago. So while the Parable of the Tree can parallel well with things that have happened since it was written, I think it's talking specifically about things based on events from the very distant past. Also, romantic love isn't a theme for the sacred Sakura, and I don't know if it will be for the Dendro Archon's story. We'll just have to wait and see, because again, it is really weird that the Dendro Archon might have a whole bunch of moon connections. All I'll say is this: Genshin Impact has a habit of using frame stories, which are just stories that are used to tell other stories, and I think Rukkhadevata and Kusanali's tale will be used in the same way. It's like Hoyoverse is giving us sneak peeks for the future of the game. As such, if I were you, I'd pay very close attention to Kusanali. I think she might teach us a lot about a certain emergency food who has lost her memories and is also very childlike, and also seems to have a lot to do with the moon. Alright, that's all I wanted to say for now. Again, these are just my initial thoughts. I will be discussing Sumeru a little bit more in my Harbinger video, so be on the lookout for that. And I'll probably make a final Sumeru video before the region gets released. But until then, ruminate on everything we just discussed. Like, what do you guys think is gonna happen in Sumeru? I have a feeling this region is gonna take us all on a wild ride. But I'm gonna take a short break before getting back to editing. I'll see you guys on the other side of the moon.